Welcome, everyone, to the first edition of the Video Verdict. I'm Matt Watkins, and I'll be your host for this series. That's right, the Verdict has moved to a completely video format. You may have known it from past iterations as a written piece with video contained within, but this year we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and it's going to be exciting. We're going to have commentary from yours truly, but we will also have game film breakdown. Unfortunately, for our first edition, we're not going to be doing that because the game wasn't televised this week. However, in future editions, we will plan on breaking down the intricacies of college basketball and look at where games were won or lost. And I think it'll be an exciting feature. It's going to be a work in progress, so you guys are going to have to bear with me a little bit. Going solo here, doing everything all on my own, so we'll see how it goes. But I think it'll be a good value add for our subscribers at Rockin' Plus. And on that note, this will be a feature solely for our subscribers, and it's something that your subscriptions have helped made possible. We now have a full access subscription to Synergy, which is a full format data and film video service that gives us really unparalleled access to a lot of things that we didn't have before. We did a lot of things the hard way. So hopefully going forward, it'll make it a little bit easier on us, and we'll be able to turn out content a lot quicker. So on that note, let's get the pleasantries out of the way, and let's talk about Mizzou basketball. So this Saturday, they played Lincoln University out of Jefferson City in a first scrimmage of the year, first public scrimmage of the year. We do know that they played Marquette in a secret scrimmage, and no, we don't know anything that happened. It's the third year in a row that that's been the case. But I did make the trip down to Columbia to get eyes on Mizzou, and I'll get to a little bit more of that here in a minute. But for those of you who don't know, Lincoln University is out of Jefferson City. They're a Division II, NCAA Division II school. They play in the Great Lakes Valley Conference with other schools like University of Missouri St. Louis, Drury, Truman, and Southwest Baptist, which has moved moved leagues since I attended 1 year, my freshman year at Southwest Baptist. Bolivar's a lovely place. But anyway, Lincoln finished 500 in Division II last year, and I believe 9-13 in conference. So they're an average Division II program. They're led by Coach Jimmy Drew, who came over from the University of Central Florida, where he coached under Johnny Dawkins and actually faced Mizzou a few times. He played his ball at SEMO and DePaul when he was in school. The Blue Tigers, I believe, is what they're still referred to. They're a smaller group, as you'd expect from a Division II school. They had 4 players that were 6'7" or taller, and I believe the tallest was 6'9". So getting kind of the basics out of the way, what I saw, some general impressions, Mizzou, you saw about what you'd hope to see. You got to see everyone except one player, who we'll address in a minute, get to see everyone take the floor, get to see kind of feel for what they're doing. Mizzou led by 30 at the break. They led by almost 50 or maybe over 50 at some point in the second half. But as far as the structure of the game is pretty fluid, a lot of up and down, not a lot of sets. You got to see a little bit of structure here and there, but it wasn't a game where it was an X's and O's battle like you might expect to see in February. Schematically, there wasn't a whole lot to be taken away. The most important thing is you got to see everyone, you got to see what the individual players were doing, and from what I could tell, everyone stayed healthy on both sides, which is basically what you're wanting to do in these early games that don't count, is get some experience and not get anyone hurt. So for Mizzou on the offensive end, looking at a few notes here, again, most of Mizzou's offensive looks came in transition or early offense. There wasn't a whole lot of sets that I saw. We did see a little bit of a pick and roll with some of Mizzou's guards and big men running that. We did see a little bit of a Princeton offense, which we've come to know, especially 2 years ago when Kobe Brown was at Mizzou, where the offense was flowing through the big man at the elbow. We saw some looks with Josh Gray and especially Peyton Marshall, who I'll get to in just a minute. But They weren't running a whole lot of sets. It was mostly up and down, a little bit of transition, a little bit of early offense, and even fewer sets. So, I don't want to take too much away from what they were doing there, just by the nature of the game. Defensively, Mizzou played man to man almost exclusively. There were times that they pick up early, full court with a token press. We'll talk about Ant Robinson getting active in that. But I did want to point out that late in the first half, according to my notes here, Mizzou ran about 6 to 7 possessions of zone defense, and it was hard for me to tell whether it was the zone that we've become accustomed to the last few years, where it's kind of a morph between a 1-3-1 and a 2-3 zone. Lincoln wasn't real prepared for it, and they didn't really know how to attack it. So the ball didn't get in the right places, and it was hard to see where Mizzou was moving, what their movement was, what their assignments were, to really tell if it was the old zone or the new zone that we've heard about, which is a little bit more aggressive, especially in defending passing lanes and trying to create deflections and a little bit more activity to lead to turnovers, which I think is something that Mizzou's wanting out of that 2-3. So I wasn't really able to take a whole lot away from that. But Mizzou did zone press a couple times. It was less than 5 total. For the most part in the second half, it was pretty bare bones, just a man-to-man half court, maybe a little bit of pressure here and there. 2 big takeaways that I had from it is, one, less fouls. It was late in the second half when Mizzou picked up their 10th team foul for the game. That's typically something that we would see last year in the first 10, 15 minutes of a game. Again, level of competition, it's hard to take anything away from that. But if this team can apply pressure and foul a lot less, that would be ideal. The second thing is there were some really intriguing lineups that I saw ran out there, and I don't expect to see a lot of them again just because they don't make a lot of sense on both ends. But one thing that I did see, or one lineup I did see that was kind of fun, was Anthony Robinson was playing the point. Trent Pierce and Trent Burns were both in the game, and Aiden Shaw and Jacob Cruz were on the wings. And that featured a look with 4 players 6'8" or taller, with the tallest being Trent Burns at 7'4". So it was really a long lineup, and it was fun to watch him defend. Offensively, it wasn't real clean, but we're talking about just a few minutes. So anyway, I thought I'd point that out, that was, that's the level of tinkering that was going on. So anyway, what we're going to do now is I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. And bring open there we go. These stats are courtesy of Sam Snelling, who got his hands on the final box score and was able to put some numbers together. What we're seeing here is what he typically does in the study hall, the post-game study hall from each game. And he was able to do that over on Rockian Plus today. So that is up for your viewing pleasure. We've got part of it posted here. And I'm not really going to discuss any of these things specifically from this screen, but I will reference a few as I go through the player recaps. The big thing I was looking for is seeing what we were getting from the players individually, what they were doing, how they were being used, if they look like they'd improved, any physical differences, things like that. And first and foremost, Tony Perkins didn't play. You won't see him listed there. That's because he wasn't ever in the game. The word that we got officially was that it was precautionary. There is no need for him to play. After the last few years, I can understand why there might be a little bit of hesitation on that. There's some scar tissue built up from Isaiah Mosley, not really playing a whole lot after being projected to be a big member of the rotation. Last year, John Tanjay didn't play really much at all after a lingering preseason injury kept him out. So I do understand that there might be a little bit of hesitation on that. I did ask around, and what I was told beyond the official word was that if this had been a game that would have counted, he would have played. So that's kind of the dark cloud, if you will, hanging over the scrimmage. But we'll see what happens when it gets to Memphis and whether he's in the lineup or not. I think that's going to tell us a whole lot more about whether this is an injury or whether it's something that's going to be long term, or whether it was, as Dennis Gates said in his post-game press conference, precautionary. So what we're going to do now is talk about the players who did play. I've got them sorted in the most minutes to the least minutes. The first one that we'll get to is Caleb Grill. Flat out, it's the best I've seen him in a Tiger uniform. He was playing really well. Granted, when you shoot 5 of 6 from three-point range, and that's what your major aspect of your offensive game, that's a big part of it. But he was active on defense. He was easily the most active on the offensive and defensive boards. He did lead the team with 6 rebounds, but when you look at a guy, their activity, blocking out, going up, getting missed shots, that's what I was really noticing from him, and he was doing it very, very well. To me, Caleb Grill is going to be a vital piece to the offense and defense for that matter. But we've talked a little bit about the big three of Tony Perkins, Mark Mitchell, and Tamar Bates, and really needing a fourth guy to step up. And I'll tell you what, if this is the Caleb Grill that we're getting the rest of the year, you can be a little bit excited about him. He looked like he wanted to be there. This is no situation where he's just back to be back. I mean, he looked completely bought in. It was exciting to see. Unfortunately, the last game that I had been to down at Mizzou Arena was the game that he got hurt. So it was nice to see him come full circle. The next player, before we move on from Caleb Grill, he played 22 minutes and his usage rate came in at about 20%, which was almost exactly what we're projecting. Mark Mitchell, next player. For my money, he was the best player on the court, and it wasn't particularly close. He looked great. He really looked great. I mentioned in our Slack chat during the game that, if he wanted to score 50, there was no one that was going to stop him from doing it. I mean, he was that dominant. He was used in a variety of ways, which I found interesting. He was attacking from the wings, like a traditional wing player would be. He did get some touches in the mid post where he would either attack his man off the dribble or back him down. And that was what I was kind of interested in seeing, because that was a lot of how Kobe Brown was used in that versatile 4 to 5 man role, getting him in a position where a bigger defender had to guard him, and Kobe could either shoot over him or use his speed to get around him, or if they put a smaller defender on him, that he could simply back him down and bury him in the paint. So we did see a little bit of that out of Mark Mitchell. He was grabbing boards and pushing them up the court just like you'd want to see. He did hit 2 3-pointers. One is a trailer on a transition attempt, and the other one is a traditional spot-up attempt. Shot still isn't what I would call aesthetically pleasing, but it looked better. There was still a slight hitch at the top, and his second made 3-pointer especially came out really flat. But when you make a few and get some confidence, there's not a whole lot to criticize on that front. He was able to get to the line whenever he wanted. He was bullying guys no matter where he was on the court. I believe he picked up 5 fouls on the opposition in just 20 minutes. And perhaps the most interesting thing is that usage rate, which you'll see there. It's 31.8%. That is high. I don't expect it to be that high throughout the season, but he was sitting around 20% last year for Duke. And if you can see that move up into the 23, 24, 25% range, that's what I'm looking for to see him move from being a complementary piece to a main piece. And we saw that, and that's very encouraging. Next player, Marquez Warwick, played 18 minutes, had a rather small 15% usage rate. I think Warwick, we didn't really get a great view of him because Tony Perkins was out. He was tasked with being the primary point guard. And listen, there's always going to be questions about how guys scale up as they come from a mid-major, such as the Horizon League, which is where he came from at Northern Kentucky. But, he just didn't really look comfortable in the role that he was asked to play. And I think that is something that you kind of have to take into context with him. He took 2 shots the entire game. One of them was in the flow of the offense. It just wasn't really what I've become accustomed to seeing Marquez Warwick doing and watching film. So I'm not going to completely write off his performance, but there is a lot of context needed. The next player is Jacob Cruz, who the minutes may be a little misleading here. He did play 17 minutes and had a usage rate of just under 18%, which is about what you'd expect. But he really didn't get into the game until late in the first half. He wasn't getting a whole lot of run with the starters. He was mostly playing with the reserves. Whether that was by design or whether that's indicative of something more, I don't know. But as far as what he did on the court, it's exactly what you'd expect. He was asked to shoot some three-pointers. Unfortunately, didn't hit any of them. I think he went 0 for 3. But he looked good. He moved good. He was a fixture in the offense. It didn't quite go his way in the first game. So of the two transfers, those two guys probably had the most disappointing outings, that being Warwick and Cruz. But I don't think there's a whole lot of concern, at least on my point, when I look at what they did.
Yeah.
However, now moving on to Ant Robinson, who played a little over 16 and a half minutes and had a minuscule 9.7% usage rate. Ant looked great. His offense wasn't really a factor, but it didn't matter. The man was a terror. When you look at what Anthony Robinson does, ideally, that's pester the living heck out of opposing ball handlers, and that's what he was doing. He was doing it 94 feet. He was credited with 6 steals, but there were 2 to 3 deflections that were near steals that didn't make it into the categories. I don't expect him to have quite that big of an impact when we start the season against Memphis or even further down the road, but it was encouraging to see that we saw glimpses of him being an all-around pest on defense last year. But when we moved to Lincoln this year, that's exactly what you wanted to see. You wanted to see guys struggle to get across the midline, and that's exactly what happened. There were multiple times that they looked like it was a relief just to get into the front court. So Ant had a great game. His speed and aggressiveness was well on display. And I'm really excited to see what he can do alongside a defender like Tony Perkins, assuming that the issue holding him out isn't anything serious. So Ant gets great marks all the way around. Tamar Bates played a little over 16 minutes, had a fairly pedestrian usage rate of 18.4%. There weren't any takeaways from Tamar Bates. He looked exactly like he did a year ago. He might look a little bit bulkier, physically speaking, a little bit more muscular, but as far as his game, he is pushing in transition. He knocked down a few open jump shots. He attacked the rim every now and then. I mean, it was exactly what you've come to expect from Tamar. So nothing too crazy in his outing. Moving on to some of the freshmen, Honor Boateng played 16 and a half minutes and had a usage rate of 16.4%. Physically looks the part. I mean, he's ready to play Division I basketball from a build standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint. Didn't really see him shoot a whole lot. Did see at least 1 3-pointer. The form looks solid. Shot didn't go in. There's not a whole lot to take away from that when you're not super involved on the offensive end. Defensively, he looked good, looked the part, looked physical, looked like he's going to do well holding up against SEC wings. He was one of the first guys off the bench into the game, which probably tells you that either Dennis Gates wanted to get a longer look at him or that he might be perhaps even above the number 8 slot, which was where I had him at in our preseason projections in the rotation. Aiden Shaw played a little over 13 minutes and had a usage rate of 12.2%, which is almost his career average. And if that should tell you anything, it should tell you everything. He was basically the same guy we've seen all of last year. That's both good and bad. He really didn't get involved a whole lot on the offense. He did have one nice drive out of his spot up where he took it in and would have posterized the guy had he offered any resistance, but laid it in. Defensively, he was sound. He was athletic. He was disruptive. He looked like everything you wanted on that end. But I mean, the question for Aiden is simple. Can he get involved in offense? There were several times that they would push the ball up the court, push it up to him on the wing, he'd dribble it into the corner and just let the rest of the offense come down. There's no interest in attacking the rim, and those are just situations where you got to hope that Aiden sees that he's got to become more involved on the offense. 12.2%, if that were an outlier, that's one thing, but it's just hard to make the math work when you've got a guy like that out there. So we'll see how it progresses. I'm not going to write him off based on one game, but it is perhaps concerning a little bit that there wasn't a whole lot of difference than what we saw last year. Moving on to Peyton Marshall. Peyton played just about 10 minutes in the game and had a rather hefty 31.8% usage rate. He was definitely a fixture in the offense. He did have a few turnovers, including a charge on his first touch. But he looked good. On offense especially, he looked good. I thought he was probably the most poised big man that Mizzou played in the Princeton looks. He had several good passes out of that set. One to a cutting Anner Boateng for a lay-in. He looked like he was reading the play, and he delivered the pass on time and accurately. And for a 7-footer who's a freshman, those are big things. You may not think of it like, oh, he made a good pass. No, these are things that he worked on with Overtime Elite and Corey Frazier. They had talked with Mizzou staff about what they wanted to see from him his last year of high school, and that's exactly what they worked on. So being able to see a few of those things manifest in live action on the college level is big. Defensively, there's definitely going to be some questions. He moves well for his size. He doesn't move well overall, which, if that makes sense, he's a big man. He's a big man. When you get him in ball screen coverage, he's got to be more nimble. He's got to communicate better. Those are all things he's going to pick up with time and experience and conditioning. So I think he's a little bit more advanced on the offensive end right now than he is defensively. Flipping it over to Josh Gray, who actually I skipped over. He played 11 and a half minutes and had a 17.3% usage rate. Josh was definitely more advanced defensively than offensively. His defense is basically the opposite of what we saw out of Peyton Marshall. Had good communications. He was playing in drop coverage and pick and roll coverage. He was where he needed to be. He called out screens. He turned away and he dribbled drives. I mean, he was sound defensively. He was good on the interior as well. But offensively, we just didn't see a whole lot from him. There weren't many design touches. He got a few passes that at the elbow where he was expected to distribute, and nothing ever really came out of those. It's hard to say yay or nay on that, but if we want to compare and contrast the big men, they played similar minutes, but we saw more offensively out of Peyton Marshall and we saw more defensively out of Josh Gray. So I think that might be kind of something to watch as we go forward. But I think perhaps the bigger takeaway here is that in a 40-minute game, the two of them combined to play for not quite 20 minutes. So I do think that there is probably going to be a significant amount of time this year where Mizzou is not having either of them on the court. And if that means playing small, then that's what we'll call it. The team as a whole is much bigger than they had been. But still, I don't know if we're going to see a pretty even time split of 40 minutes amongst them, even when you include Trent Burns, who we'll discuss here in a minute. I think there's going to be a fair amount of time when we don't see any of those three on the court. The last number of guys here, there's not a whole lot of takeaways. Marcus Allen played 9.5 minutes, was not involved in the offense whatsoever, 5.5% usage rate. He did some nice things out there. He defended well, but it just, there's not a whole lot of takeaway from him. I've gotten familiar with this video in high school, but for now, I don't feel real comfortable commenting based on the level of things that we saw. T.O. Barrett also got about 9.5 minutes, which may have been a result of Tony Perkins not playing as the third guard. He looked good defensively. He was, he's a very, very solidly built 6'4". Like all of the freshmen, the physicality and strength and athleticism are not going to be issues translating, but the offense it's got a ways to go. He did make one shot, I believe, a layup. He was 0 for 4 from the free throw line. It's nothing to criticize. He's a freshman in his first game, but we're just trying to talk about expectations as we go forward, that this is a really good class, but even a guy like T.O. Barrett, pretty renowned player coming in, it's going to be a pretty tough uphill battle for him to get playing time this year, just the same with Marcus Allen. Trent Pierce played around the same amount of minutes and amped his usage rate up pretty high to 30%. He took a few shots, made one, missed one from three-point range. It was good to see him get one in. Not a whole lot of other notes that I had from Trent's game. And then for the other, Trent Burns, he played 7.5 minutes, 55.2% usage rate. Trent, he was exciting to watch when he came in. If he got the ball, it was going up. He took 2 pretty bad shots, a fall away jumper off a post up and a heat check 3 relatively later in the game. He's kind of the Venn diagram of prospects. So you have the circle that says he needs a lot of work, and then you have the circle that says, but he does some really freaking cool things, and he is right there in the middle. At 7'4", he was able to wipe away a shot at the top of the square on the backboard. That happened right in front of me. My jaw was literally on the floor. On the very next possession, he pulled up from 3 off the bounce, nailed it. I mean, think about what I'm saying here. 7'4" guy pulling up off the bounce, drilling 3-point shots. I mean, you just don't see that. He finished a dunk in transition. It's a trailer. I mean, he did a lot of things that really made you say, wow, perhaps more than anyone on the court. However, it's going to be work in progress. There's a lot of communication issues that he had, being in the right place defensively, knowing what a good shot is, knowing how to move the ball in offense, just a lot of the understanding of the college game. And that's going to come with time. But you should be excited that Mizzou has him, and you should be excited to see him develop. But I wouldn't say you should be excited to be calling for him to be on the floor for 30 minutes a game. So anyway, that is all I have for the player reviews. We will be turning our attention to Memphis. Mizzou tips off in Memphis next Monday, 1 week from this time of the recording at 7:00. They're actually playing an exhibition game against Alabama right now, which I will plan to watch in the coming days and get a report up on Rockium. Plus, we have a full report on the UNC scrimmage that they had. So check for those things coming up this week. We'll plan on having our first full film breakdown after the Memphis game next week. And that's all I have. I would anticipate most of these verdicts being a little bit shorter than tonight. It's just getting through 15 guys, 14 technically, is a little tough, especially having to speak through it instead of being able to show you with film. But, we look forward to doing this, and I'm excited to be here doing this new feature, and I hope you all enjoy it. So until then, stay in school.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.